I have spent 6 years trying to grieve my sister in peace. 6 years trying to build something that honored who she was. And I spent the last 4 months of those 6 years learning that everything I thought I was doing for her had been poisoned from the very beginning. I am going to tell you the full story today because I have been carrying it alone for too long, and because I think it matters. I think Mara deserves to have her name mean what it was supposed to mean. My sister Mara died 31 days after her 31st birthday. Ovarian cancer. By the time they found it, it had already moved into her lymph nodes, and by the time we understood what that meant, we had maybe 5 months to prepare for a world without her in it. Those 5 months were the longest and shortest of my life simultaneously. Long because every single day was so heavy, and short because at the end of them she was gone. She was a kindergarten teacher. She had a rescue greyhound named Bishop and a half-finished quilt on her bedroom floor, and about 9,000 unread emails in her inbox. She was the kind of person who remembered your coffee order, and forgot to charge her phone, and made you feel like the most interesting person in any room she walked into. She used to say that most people walk through life half awake, and that the whole trick was just to actually pay attention. She paid attention to everything, to everyone. And then she was gone, and the attention she had paid to the world went with her, and the world kept moving anyway, and that felt like the most unfair thing I had ever encountered. Losing her was the kind of loss that does not announce itself all at once. It finds you in grocery stores. It finds you when a song comes on. It finds you on her birthday, and on the anniversary of the diagnosis, and on a random Tuesday in February, when you smell something that reminds you of her kitchen, and you have to sit down in the middle of a parking lot, because your legs, it have stopped working. I am her younger brother. My name is Daniel. I was 26 when she died. I am 32 now, and I am telling this story because I have been sitting on it for 4 months, and I do not know what else to do with it. About 2 months after Mara's funeral, I set up a small online memorial fund in her name. It was not complicated, and it was not ambitious. I called it the Mara Ellison Fund, and I linked it to a local cancer nonprofit, and wrote a short paragraph about who she was: the teacher, the dog, mom, the best listener you ever met, the person who showed up with food before you even knew you were hungry. I shared it once on social media. People responded. Some of her former students' parents donated. Former colleagues. A few strangers who had lost someone to the same diagnosis. Teachers from her school pooled together and gave as a group. I raised just over $4,000 that first year. I sent every cent to the cancer nonprofit directly through their donation portal. I got a tax receipt. I kept a spreadsheet. I felt close to her doing it, like I was still honoring the instinct she had always had to make things better for people. That was the whole point of it. Not to heal myself. Just to make sure her name still meant something in the world. And then I got busy with my own life the way you do. I moved cities for work. I started a relationship. I checked in on the fund page, occasionally saw that it was still getting small donations, and thought nothing of it. My parents mentioned it sometimes, my mother especially. She said she was maintaining it. She said the response had been beautiful. She thanked me for starting it, which made me feel good. I thought I had done something right. I thought for once my parents and I were aligned in something. We are not an easy family. We have never been an easy family. My mother has a way of making everything feel like a verdict, and my father has a way of going very quiet when things are hard, which has always made me feel more alone in the hard moments rather than less. But around the fund, around Mara's memory, it felt like we were holding the same thing carefully. That feeling was something I needed. I held on to it, and I was not paying attention. That is the thing I keep coming back to now. I was not paying attention, and they were counting on exactly that. The first moment that anything felt wrong was at Christmas 2 years ago. We were in my parents' kitchen after dinner, and my father made an offhand comment about the charity, not the fund, not the memorial, the charity. He said something about how the charity had had a strong year, that the online presence was really paying off. I asked what he meant by charity. He got a little vague. He said they had formally registered it as a nonprofit to make it more legitimate to give donors the tax benefit. He said it gave them something meaningful to do in retirement, a reason to get up in the morning. He said Mara would have wanted that for them. My mother nodded. She mentioned something about how much administrative work it was, how they had to keep such careful records, and then she said she was going to put the kettle on, and the conversation dissolved and I did not push it. I want to be honest with you about that moment. Because it matters. I noticed something, and I chose not to look at it, and I think a part of me was genuinely relieved. Relieved that my parents had something to pour their grief into, something that connected them to her. They had lost their daughter. They had watched her die. If running a charity in her name gave them purpose and structure in a retirement that might otherwise have been very lonely, was that so terrible? That is what I told myself. That is a very expensive piece of self-deception, and I paid for it with 6 months of donors' money going somewhere it was never supposed to go. The actual unraveling started because of a woman named Gretchen. She had found the Mara Ellison Memorial Foundation, which is apparently what it was now called, a full foundation, not a fund, through a cancer support network online. Her daughter was 28 years old and had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3 months before Gretchen found the foundation page. She had donated $250. She received a form letter thanking her with my parents' home address, listed as the mailing address for the organization. She had a question about whether her donation was tax deductible, and she tracked me down through my original social media post because my name was still on it as the founder. She messaged me asking who to contact for a donation receipt. She also asked, and I want you to understand that this question hit me like cold water, she asked what the foundation was currently funding because she was hoping to volunteer. I did not know how to answer her. I sat there reading her message, and I realized that I had no idea what the Mara Ellison Memorial Foundation was currently funding. I had no idea what it had become. I had given my parents my sister's name and my sister's photograph and my sister's story, and I had not checked what they had done with any of it. I went to the foundation's website that night. It had a professional logo, Mara's name in a clean serif font with a small ribbon graphic. It had photographs of her. Some were photos I recognized from her Facebook page. Others were from family albums, which meant my parents had provided them. It had a mission statement about supporting ovarian cancer patients and funding early detection research. It had a donate button and a testimonials section with quotes from donors about what the foundation had meant to them. It looked real. It looked like something people had built with love. It looked like the kind of thing Mara actually would have been proud of. And then I clicked on the Financial Filings tab because registered nonprofits are required to make their financial records publicly accessible. And right there in the most recent annual filing, I found something that stopped me cold. The Mara Ellison Memorial Foundation had received $184,000 in donations the previous year. Of that amount, $9,200 had been distributed as charitable grants. The remaining $174,800 had gone to administrative expenses, operational costs, and compensation. Compensation. I read that word 4 times. I read the whole table 4 times. I went back to the beginning and read it again. If you enjoy real emotional drama stories like this, consider subscribing. I post new stories every week and there is so much more to come. I want to walk you through what I did over the next 3 weeks because I think the order matters. I did not call my parents immediately. I was not ready. I also, if I am being honest, was not fully sure yet what I was looking at. I told myself there could be an explanation. I told myself nonprofit accounting was complicated. I told myself I did not understand how foundations worked and maybe 5% to grants was somehow normal. I spent 4 days researching nonprofit financial standards before I accepted that it was not. The standard for reputable charities is that at least 60 to 70% of funds go directly to program services, the actual charitable work. The very lowest acceptable floor, according to every watchdog organization I consulted, is about 33%. 5% is not an anomaly. 5% is fraud by another name. I went back through every annual filing the foundation had submitted since it was registered, 4 years of them. Year 1, $47,000 raised $3,800 to grants, the rest to expenses and compensation. Year 2, 91,000 raised 6,500 to grants. Year 3, 142,000 raised 8,100 to grants. Year 4, 184,000 raised 9,200 to grants. Each year the donations grew. Each year the grants shrank as a percentage of the total. The ratio was consistent. Roughly 5 cents of every dollar raised went to anything resembling Mara's actual mission. The other 95 cents went somewhere else, and I needed to find out exactly where. I submitted a formal request for the detailed expense reports. Nonprofits are required to provide these. It took 2 weeks and a follow-up letter, but I got them. And then I had names. I had line items. Executive director compensation, my mother. Annual salary $68,000. Deputy director compensation, my father. Annual salary $54,000. Together they were pulling $122,000 a year in salary from a foundation named after their dead daughter. Office administration, a P.O. box rental, $42 a month. Marketing and communications, a website subscription, and a design software account, about $800 a year. Then there were a series of entries under facility maintenance and operations that I could not immediately identify until I cross-referenced the address on the expense report with a property records database I found through the county. Assessor's website. My parents own a second property, a small lake cottage about 90 minutes from where they live. I did not know they had purchased it. The one time I had asked my mother about a cottage my aunt mentioned in passing, she told me it was basically a fixer-upper, barely livable, not worth the drive. The foundation's expense reports had logged facility maintenance, utility costs, and seasonal upkeep for a property address that matched the county assessor's record for a lake cottage registered in my parents' names. The foundation had been filing operational costs for my parents' vacation home for 3 consecutive years. I sat in my apartment with all of this spread across my kitchen table: printed filings, highlighted line items, a legal pad where I had done the math 3 different ways to make sure I was reading it correctly, and I thought about Mara. I thought about what she would say if I called her. I thought about Bishop, who still lives with my aunt now, and is very old and very slow but still perks up if you say Mara's name, which my aunt says she tries not to do because it is too sad. I thought about the kindergarteners Mara used to teach, who are probably in middle school now, who learned from her that when you did something wrong, you said so and you made it right. And I thought about Gretchen, who had donated $250 because her daughter was 28 years old and had ovarian cancer, and she needed to believe that something out there was working on the problem. Would you have been able to sit on that information? I genuinely want to know. Because I tried to think of a version of this that made my parents something other than what the documents made them. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning in October. I did not call ahead because I was worried that if I called ahead I would give them time to prepare a story, and I did not trust myself to hold the line against a prepared story. My mother was in the kitchen making coffee. My father was at the kitchen table reading something on his tablet. It looked like a Sunday morning. It looked like nothing was wrong. I sat down and I put the folder on the table. My mother looked at the folder and then at me. She said, "Daniel, you look pale. Are you sick?" I said, "I need you to explain the foundation's financials to me." There was a silence. A particular kind of silence that I recognized from childhood. The silence that happens in the second before someone decides which version of the truth they are going to offer you. My father put down his tablet. He looked at the folder, and then he looked at me, and what I saw in his face was not shock and it was not confusion. It was the expression of someone who had known this conversation was coming for a long time and had been hoping it would not arrive before they were ready for it. He looked caught, and then he looked angry. He said, "We built that from nothing. We put years of work into that foundation." I said, "You built it from Mara's name. You built it from people who were grieving and who believed they were honoring her." I opened the folder. I put the financial summary on the table. I said, "I need you to explain to me where this money went." My mother sat down slowly. She said, "It is not as simple as it looks on paper." I said, "Walk me through it then." And then she said something that I have turned over in my mind every day since. She said, "We deserve this. We spent everything we had on her medical bills. Everything. Do you know what it cost to watch your daughter die? Do you know what that did to us? We are 68 years old. We have nothing in retirement. We gave everything to her treatment and then she died anyway, and we were left with nothing. We built this so we would not have to live on nothing. And here is where it gets complicated, because part of what she said was true. They had spent money, years of it. Treatment costs, travel, hotel rooms near the hospital, the various things that insurance covers in theory and in practice makes you fight for. I know that. I was there for parts of it and I saw how it drained them. But I also knew because I had been with Mara through the process, because I had sat in on some of the insurance calls, that the majority of her treatment costs had been covered. The out-of-pocket total was significant, but it was not the sum that my mother was implying. It was not remotely close to the $600,000 the foundation had raised over 4 years. I said the insurance covered most of the treatment. You know that. My father said there were other costs. There were costs you do not know about. I said the foundation has raised nearly $600,000 in 4 years. Less than $30,000 of that reached a cancer patient. You are paying yourselves $122,000 a year in salary from a nonprofit named after your daughter. You are using foundation funds to maintain your vacation property. That is not a legitimate operation. That is fraud. My mother started crying. Real tears, and I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. Whatever else they had done, the grief was real. She was not performing it. She said Mara would have wanted us to be okay. She always wanted us to be okay. I said Mara wanted cancer patients to be okay. That is why she let me use her name. That is the only reason the fund existed in the first place. My father said something then that ended the conversation. He said, "You do not understand what it is like to lose a child," and I said no, but I understand what it is like to lose a sister, and she would be ashamed of what you have done with her memory. I left. I did not slam the door. I walked out and sat in my car in their driveway for about 12 minutes, and then I drove away, and I have not been back since. A like on this video helps more people find this story. If you have made it this far, it would mean a lot. Over the following 2 weeks I did the hardest thinking I have ever done, because this is where it gets genuinely complicated, not logistically but morally. On one side of the decision I was facing, my parents are in their late 60s. An investigation would not just end the foundation. It could mean criminal charges for fraud and misappropriation of charitable funds. It could mean restitution orders. It could mean prison time, or at minimum a level of public humiliation that would define the final chapter of their lives. They are my parents. Whatever they have done, I have known them my entire life. I have loved them my entire life imperfectly, and with a lot of grief on both sides, but genuinely. They did not cause Mara's cancer. They sat with her through it. They held her hand. That is real. On the other side, Gretchen. Her daughter, who was 28 and fighting the same disease that killed my sister. The hundreds of other donors who had written checks in Mara's name because they believed in what the foundation said it was doing. The cancer patients, who should have received grants from a foundation collecting nearly $200,000 a year and instead received $9,000. And Mara herself, who had no vote in how her name was used after she died, and who taught 5-year-olds that when you did something wrong you said so and you made it right. I contacted a nonprofit accountability organization. I chose to go to them rather than to the IRS or law enforcement directly because I wanted to understand what I was actually looking at before I made any irreversible decision. I described the situation without naming the organization. The person I spoke with said, "Based on what you are describing, this meets the criteria for a serious compliance violation and potentially criminal misappropriation of charitable assets." They asked me if I wanted to file a formal referral. I said I needed a few more days. I thought about it for 3 more days. I thought about my mother crying at the kitchen table. I thought about my father's face when I walked in with that folder. I thought about the lake cottage and the $68,000 salary and the $9,200 distributed to actual cancer patients across an entire calendar year. I thought about Mara's face in the photograph on the foundation's website, smiling, not knowing. I thought about what she would have asked me if she could. She would have asked me one question. She would have said, "Is this the right thing to do?" Not the easy thing. Not the painless thing. The right thing. I filed the referral. The investigation began within 3 weeks of that conversation. My parents were notified formally. I received a call from my mother the night they received the notification. It lasted 14 minutes. She said things I am not going to repeat here because some of them were about Mara, and Mara deserves better than to have her name used as a weapon in an argument about accountability. My mother said I had betrayed the family. She said no real son would do this to his parents in their twilight years. She said Mara would have found a way to handle this privately. She said she would never forgive me. I listened to all of it. I did not hang up. When she was finished, I said I love you. I said I am sorry this is the situation we are in. I said I hope when this is over we can find a way back to each other. And then I said goodbye. I have thought about her accusation that Mara would have handled it privately more than almost anything else in this experience. I genuinely do not know if she is right. Mara was kinder than me in ways that were not small. She had a patience with people that I have never been able to replicate. She would have sat with my parents longer than I did. She would have looked for something to understand before she looked for something to condemn. But she also had a moral directness that I have always admired, and that I know was real. She did not believe in comfortable silence. She did not believe that love meant letting people do wrong things without consequence. She believed that a hard conversation done with love was always better than an easy silence done with fear. I think she would have made the same call I made. I have to believe that, because her name is on a website right now, above a donate button, telling strangers that their money will help people fighting ovarian cancer. And that is not true. And as long as it is not true, the least I can do is say so publicly. That is the minimum thing. That is not even courage. That is just honesty. The Mara Ellison Memorial Foundation has been suspended pending the investigation. The website is still live. These administrative processes take time, but the donation function has been disabled and a notice has been placed on the page. My parents have retained an attorney. We have not spoken since my mother's phone call. I spoke with Gretchen once more through the accountability organization. They asked if I was willing to be identified to relevant parties as the person who initiated the referral, and I said yes. Gretchen thanked me in a message that I have read many times. She did not ask for details. She just said thank you for telling someone. I wrote back and said I was sorry it took me as long as it did. She said you told someone in the end. That is what matters. Her daughter is still in treatment. I think about that a lot. There are things I keep returning to, turning them over, the way you turn something smooth over in your hand when you need something to hold on to. The first is this: grief is one of the most powerful forces in human experience, and it can be weaponized. It can be turned outward against donors who are themselves in the middle of it, who write checks because they are scared and heartbroken, and they need to believe that something out there is working on the problem. It can be turned inward, used to justify things that would be obviously wrong in any other context, because grief makes people feel that the rules of ordinary life do not apply to them, that they have already paid a cost that exempts them from accountability. I was used by it twice, once by the loss itself and once by what my parents constructed in the aftermath. The second thing is simpler and more personal. I started the Mara Ellison Fund because I wanted her to mean something after she was gone. Because I could not stand the idea of a world that just continued without acknowledging what it had lost. And somehow that impulse, that specific and genuine love, became the raw material for something that betrayed every person who felt the same way. That is a specific kind of grief on top of grief. It does not have a name that I know of. The third thing is the hardest. My parents are not finished grieving. They will never be finished. They lost their daughter. They watched her die over years, one treatment at a time, one failed hope at a time. What they built was wrong. The foundation was fraud. But the grief underneath it, I cannot call that fake. I cannot call it performance. I have to sit with the knowledge that the same loss produced two very different responses, mine and theirs. And I spend a lot of time wondering what made us different, and whether it was something in us, or something in the circumstances, or something that was just luck. What I know for certain is this Mara was a kindergarten teacher who spent her career showing 5-year-olds that honesty was not just a rule but a way of being in the world. That when you did something wrong, you said so and you made it right. Not because someone was watching, because it was what integrity actually meant in practice. She believed that with her whole heart. She lived it out in ways I used to find almost embarrassing when I was younger and more cynical about that kind of thing. I am not cynical about it anymore. Every night I look at the photograph of her that I keep on my desk. She is laughing, mouth open, eyes almost shut, holding Bishop by the collar because he is about to make a run for something, and she is the only thing standing between him and chaos. She looks completely alive. She looks like herself. She looks like the person she was before any of this. I made the call she would have made. I did it scared and I did it anyway, and it cost me my parents in whatever form we used to have them. I do not know if we come back from this. I do not know if the investigation leads to charges, or to restitution, or to something I have not anticipated. I do not know what the next chapter of my family looks like, or if the word family still means the same thing for me that it used to. But I know that somewhere there is a woman named Gretchen, and her daughter is 28, and they are fighting something terrifying, and they believed for a little while that there was a foundation out there fighting it with them. The least Mara's memory deserved was for that to be true. I am her little brother. I am just trying to live up to her.